So how's everybody doing? Nice cozy day. Nobody will be, wanting to play outside today. Okay. So we're going to start with a little meditation. Oh, Marianne, do you have any announcements before we begin? Sorry. Let's start and enjoy. I think that's a great idea. Hopefully we'll enjoy. Hopefully you recovered from yesterday. Everybody was like, by 5 o'clock, everybody's looking a little like... Everybody get a good night's sleep? I think I was in bed, 8:45-ish. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're going to begin with a little meditation that'll sort of serve as a bit of a review of what we did yesterday, or at least kind of show us how what we studied yesterday in terms of karma can really help us practically with the situations that come up in our lives, like a way to kind of rethink and evaluate the situations that come up in our lives. So let's begin by sitting in our meditation posture with our back straight. Get in that comfortable posture, so whether you're sitting up in a chair or sitting down on a cushion, your legs crossed comfortably if you're sitting down, or braced in a nice stable posture if you're sitting up in a chair. And then we'll do just a brief body sweep to sweep through our bodies, see if we've got any tension or tightness in our bodies. Deliberately relax any constriction or tension. So starting at the crown of the head and sweeping down through, relaxing the forehead, the area around the eyes, the jaw, and the neck and shoulders, another area we often hold tension, so check, and if you notice any tightness, just deliberately relax. And then sweeping down through the torso, relax the belly, relax the buttocks, and sweeping down the legs, all the way down to the feet. And then after settling the body, let's settle the mind by focusing on the breath. For a few minutes, just focusing on the sensations of breathing in the body, to get yourself here, in this room, in the present moment. So it might be that you feel the sensations in the abdomen, your diaphragm expanding and contracting. Or perhaps in the area of the chest, the lungs expanding and contracting, or the area of the nostrils, the air going in and out of the nostrils. So if it's helpful, you can focus at one of these places, wherever the sensations of breathing seem the most obvious. And if your mind starts to drift to a thought or a sound outside or some other sense experience, the minute you notice that you've drifted away from the focus on the breath, just release the distraction and return to the breath very gently. And now draw from your memory and think of a time recently that you had an unwanted experience that maybe left you feeling upset in some way, angry or sad, or somehow disturbed your peace of mind. Just something unwanted and unpleasant. Doesn't need to be the worst thing that ever happened in your whole life. Not something with that level of intensity, just something with a kind of moderate level of intensity, but just something that you found annoying, irritating, saddening, somehow unwanted. So think about the experience. What happened? What led up to it? Were there other people involved? What was the episode that led to that feeling of this was an unpleasant, unwanted experience? Think of as many details as you can. And then think about the outcome of that experience. Did the feeling that you had of that experience being unpleasant, did it prompt you to do or say anything as a result of that? Did it prompt you into any kind of behavior? Maybe it just left you feeling upset and you didn't engage in any verbal or physical behavior, but maybe it did prompt some kind of behavior. Just reflect. And then if you did behave in a certain way, were there any ramifications from that behavior? What were kind of the long-term consequences of your behavior in reaction to that episode that happened? And now, think back on that original experience and think, if you'd had an understanding at the time that it was due to karma that you were having that experience and it wasn't just kind of happening randomly, you weren't just sort of the victim of circumstance, but it was actually as a result of some karma that you were having that experience. Imagine being able to apply that understanding in that moment, in the midst of that experience. And how might that have changed your emotional reaction? How might that have changed your feelings about that experience, about that episode? And how might that have changed your behavior? With that understanding of karma, would your behavior have changed what you did or said as a result of that experience? Okay, so that's an example of how we can use our understanding of karma to really change our behavior. It's not just this theoretical thing of like, oh yeah, cause and effect, and it really impacts our behavior. And again, like I was saying yesterday, doesn't mean that karma means you deserve to suffer because you did something bad, right? We talked about that, of this whole like punishment thing that's really hard for us to get used to. No, it's not that. It's just about cause and effect. Like Newton's third law of motion, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, that's all. But it does mean that, like I said, the full disclosure, it's such a drag in Buddhism, you can't just blame. You're not just a helpless victim. It means that you're experiencing something that you created the cause for. So it really can help change your response. If you retaliate when you're harmed, you yell at somebody else when they do, rather than just kind of go, wow, okay, this happened, I created some cause for this. The dumbest thing in the world would be to like flip out and do something negative and create another whole chain reaction of cause and effect, like dumb. So we react with more patience. Not that we're like rolling over and being a doormat, but you just have some understanding of cause and effect, and it really, really does help the more you habituate to this when the unwanted things happen. And I was saying something yesterday, and there's a story. There's two friends of mine, a monk and a nun, were living in Dharamsala in northern India, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama lives in exile. And we have a retreat center called Tushita Retreat Center. Has anybody ever been there to Tushita in the room? You have. So it's up this really steep, long hill going up there. And in the summertime in that part of India is this monsoon, which is so full on. I mean, it's just unbelievable. This is nothing compared to it's like buckets. So the monk is walking down this steep hill and the nun is walking up, because that's the way you go to the local town. And it's like pouring rain. And as the monk kind of is nearly at the level of the nun, he slips and falls because the street is really slippery, and he slips and falls, and as he gets up he goes, great, another one down. So that's kind of the attitude that we have. Instead of like freaking out when unwanted things happen, if you have the idea of like, okay, great, karmic seed just sprouted, finished for now, it really does help a lot. And then you realize that by your reaction to what happens, and we'll talk about that more a lot today when we talk about the 12 links, like how we react then to the unwanted really determines our future. So it's better not to react with any kind of negativity, or else we just perpetuate. And by the way, join the club. That's what we've been doing since beginningless time, maybe until yesterday. Like, congratulations, we can finally get some wisdom to make that breakthrough. Because remember, we were talking about this root ignorance that's really the key to everything, is a misunderstanding about cause and effect that has us retaliating all over the place, or freaking out, or being passive aggressive mostly. The prison inmates retaliate. They come in with broken noses and black eyes all the time. I don't think I've ever taught a class on the outside that's somebody's come in, with the broken nose. But in prison, we do it more, covertly. Our revenge, happens a little bit more. But we do, because we just kind of have this attitude of like, oh, that terrible jerk just came and did that thing, and it's so unfair. Well, no, guess what? We did create the cause. So again, it's not to get into this thing of like, oh, I'm so terrible because all these things are happening to me, so I must have been a horrible person. Because like I said, we have such deep pockets of karmic seeds, all of us from past lives, so there's no difference between us and anybody who's experiencing the greatest happiness or the greatest suffering, except a question of timing. So, don't get into that blame thing or they're terrible because this horrible thing is happening. We're all in the same boat, it's just a matter of timing. So any reflections on that little contemplation? Anything come up? Yeah, you don't have to confess. Yeah, Ellen. Yeah. 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 Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the best attitude, is just to go, okay, what's done is done. I didn't know better, but use those memories and go, oh, wow, I can really see how it would be different. So if something similar happened now, hopefully I can train my mind to respond in a way that's really quite different than I would have, because it's always a progression. So, it's important not to get into these like, oh, if only I'd done my whole life different with the, hopefully next life we'll take these imprints of what we're learning this weekend. Hopefully, we'll be solid enough. I mean, that's my prayer, into the next life, and I won't be so stupid next time, that kind of thing will come up, because you really can see how it can change things a lot. Sometimes people say, oh, but there really are these horrible, annoying people. And I go, a lot of people that are the most annoying are the most lonely. And maybe if you're just patient and hung out with them a little bit, they'd feel like somebody cared about them and they wouldn't be as annoying. Like, we can do that too. It's not like, oh, they're just self-existently like jerks. They're probably confused because they don't even realize how much they alienate people, and then they're in this spiral of loneliness and isolation that makes them even more cranky, and maybe we could be the breakthrough for them too. So kind of looking at things from a different perspective can be really, really helpful. Okay, so yesterday we had a really long day. We looked at lots of lists of this, that, and the other, didn't we? So we looked at karma and all of the sort of the kind of characteristics of karma. We looked at the 4 components that make a complete karmic action, and then we looked at the 4 results that happen if we do have a complete karmic action. So all of those details about like the actual dynamics and functionality of karma. And then we looked at the 10 non-virtues, went through what all of those are, what they really mean in terms of those 4 components. There's still, gray areas. As we can see, it's not always cut and dried. We talked about killing for about an hour, and then I had to cut it off. We could keep going with that for a long time. And, euthanasia, assisted suicide, that's a whole nother conversation, but really applying the principles to those ethical dilemmas. I think we got an example of how it's not necessarily so clear-cut. But what we can do is at least apply these principles that we're learning to those dilemmas. Think, okay, what are the 4 components of that action? What's my motivation for doing it, right? Because sometimes they are a little bit more ambiguous, and you're really checking your motivation. And like I said, the Buddhist kind of worldview is quite a different worldview than the very worldly one. And sometimes you'll find that people don't understand your ethical choices. And we have to just sort of hold the line a little bit with things like that, because our worldview is really quite different, and you have to get used to just kind of, holding the line with your principles if you really have made an ethical decision, because it might not be in correspondence with kind of the worldly view of things with some of these things. We did the karmic quiz, and wasn't that interesting? And then you got your data of what is creating the causes for the experiences that you're having now. And I just love that, like Jeopardy way of doing it. Like, look at the experiences in your life, and then you go back. And then one of the things that a lot of people found was no big surprises there. Because remember, one of the results of karma is to have that habit of doing that thing again. So a lot of things that we know keep creating the causes for our experience are things that we know that we have habits of doing. Not always the case. Sometimes we're having an experience that's created by some karmic cause that you're like, I can't relate to that. I've never killed anybody in this life, and it might be just old karmic seeds that you don't have that habit anymore. And then one of the things a couple of people mentioned was noticing that sometimes something happened early in life a lot, and now it's not happening anymore. Well, that karma is exhausted. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't have that any karmic seed for that at all anymore, but it means like you were experiencing, the ripening of that karma maybe a lot earlier in life, and then that, strong karma for the moment is kind of exhausted. And then we looked at purification with the 4 opponent powers. And in terms of some of the traditional practices, we did Vajrasattva practice together, which is one of the 6 traditional practices that we can do. We saw how the 4 powers are kind of built into the whole practice. We started with the power of reliance by taking refuge and generating bodhicitta, and then we meditated on regret. We did the remedy, which was that visualization with the mantra recitation, and then we did the power of refraining at the end. And so whatever practice you do, really good to kind of do it within the context of all 4 powers. Because sometimes, for example, reading sutras is one of the remedies. Don't just plop down and open up and start reading the Golden Light Sutra. Do the regret and the reliance and then the refraining at the end. If you're doing that practice as a purification practice. And I mentioned my friend who rescues the dogs, even if we're doing a practical thing. You're volunteering at the animal shelter, the conflict resolution center, whatever it is that you've decided to do as your purification, do the power of regret and reliance and refraining along with that action, which is the remedy there too. So any questions left over from yesterday? Yes?
Are there any other primary purification practices, or is the 4 opponent powers like pretty much like the primary?
Well, then those 6 traditional ones that are in your booklet, that list of 6, we do within the context of the, yeah. So all of those 6 are the remedy or the creative ones. Like I said, the opposite to what those negativities in that 4th column of the karma quiz, protecting lives, practicing generosity, saying the truth, those would all be the remedies. And then we kind of do that with the other 3 powers as well. Yeah. Yes. Ed.
What are the karmic consequences of indulging an attachment on aversion, but not as much fun?
Yeah.
Of indulging an attachment that is not one of the non-virtuous acts.
Yeah, and it doesn't have all of the consequences in terms of the rebirth, the environment, the action or the experience. But it does create a habit energy in your mind. I mean, that's one way of putting it, right? So it doesn't really, yeah. So it's sort of in terms of there is an imprint. It isn't a full karmic imprint creating an experience for you in terms of like a rebirth and in terms of an environment with certain characteristics. But it does create a grasping imprint in your mind for sure, right? For that object, like your mind is attracted to the object of attachment. So it's more like that. It's more subtle. It's definitely an imprint, but it wouldn't have the full karmic consequences. So those mental afflictions, that's kind of when we indulge in the mental afflictions. it just creates deeper imprints of that mental affliction in our mind, right? Our mind easily goes to that place. Some of the things that are considered sexual misconduct, for example, indulging in pornography or something, like, doesn't hurt anybody. It's not like cheating on your spouse, but it just deepens that imprint. And some Buddhist teachers say, look at more purity in terms of your sexual morality and don't just indulge yourself all the time, because it just makes that imprint of attachment deeper. So that would be an example of, okay, there's no consequences in terms of, it's not the same as cheating on a committed partner, but it's just creates a lot of that attachment energy deeper and deeper and deeper. So I think it's helpful to look at that kind of stuff in our lives too, like to look at the level of our mental afflictions and kind of what are our, we all have lots of attachment. And that's what in the Southern Buddhist tradition and the Pali tradition they say, actually, because that's so prevalent, that is the root of samsara. We go one step back and say it's that ignorance. But you can look at your tendency of mind to always be grasping on to the next thing that you think is going to make you happy. And we're always scanning the environment. Like I said before, like, what's going to make me happy next? Come on, come on, come on, come on. I mean, you can see it when you're on the internet. Oh my God. Like the example I used to give was channel surfing, but now we're just clicking all over the place, and our YouTube, our Facebook feed, and click, 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 click. You can really see that tendency of mind to not even stay with any one thing. The instant we start to habituate and it loses its appeal, we're just on to the next thing. I mean, it's really, really interesting to look at the mind. And then, like I said, the little graph of that impulse, the slope kind of steepens, and then we're just acting on it. And it's so much easier nowadays. We can just order it online, or just like go to the porn website or whatever. Like, you don't even have to go to the 7-Eleven. You just like click the mouse. So I've heard, not that, so there's so much more that's accessible. And it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a monk in the Thai forest tradition, who's a really good friend of mine, and we've co-taught retreats a couple of times. And I was saying, do you find it harder to get people to focus in your meditation retreats now? Like, everybody has all these devices, it's like, I read a funny article in this, The Onion, this satirical newspaper thing. And I read this article, and it was a reporting that Americans spent 99% of their time in front of luminous rectangles, and it's sort of like this funny report. And it's like so true. And he was going, yeah, I've really noticed, and I have too, in the last 10 years, just trying to get people in a meditation retreat to put the device away and put it offline for a weekend is like pulling teeth. It didn't used to be that hard until we had all our eye devices of all kinds, and it's harder and harder to focus. So yeah, just looking at that tendency in our mind of, and especially like you say, of attachment, that's the big one. Yeah. And doesn't mean you go into this denial thing and wear bread and water and shave your head and wear the same outfit every day. It doesn't mean that at all, but it just means mindfulness of those tendencies of always, wanting to grasp on to the next stimulus, because it's there for sure. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do the Buddhists have a point of view about this upcoming technological singularity that they're predicting will occur around?
What's the technical? Oh yeah, tell me. I don't think I know that.
That we've created are so smart, they're smarter than us.
Oh wow.
They're saying it's going to happen by the year 2029.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, I haven't heard that. Oh, that's new. And they'll take over like Hal in the... Well, we would say that machines can never be sentient beings. I mean, I haven't heard of any view of this because I didn't even know about this thing. I mean, people say stuff like that, but we say, no matter how you design a computer, it would not be a sentient being. Well, we're certainly addicted. Yeah, we're very addicted to them. We can't put them down. So hard to put them down. Every time I talk to anybody in their 30s, not to diss you young people, it's unbelievable. They just have their phone in their hand as an appendage. A student will ask me for an appointment, and they'll still be checking their phone while they're talking to me. And I'm kind of like, are you kidding me? But it's just so habitual, they can't even dream of just putting it away. They're just sort of glancing. It's weird. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I'm sounding like kids these days. I sound exactly like my parents. But honestly, it's like so weird, you know. Yeah. I would have to. I need to research or figure it out. Explain it to him. Yeah. Yeah, you had something.
It's a kind of complicated question, and maybe I already know the answer, but I thought I'd ask you.
Yeah.
What if, like, you have karma that ripens at a very early age?
Yeah.
So you're too young to know about karma.
Yeah.
And created additional karma as a reaction to the.
Absolutely.
So it's just the horrible nature of samsara.
Well, exactly. And that's why, I mean, and thank goodness there's purification, because haven't we all done it? And don't we all still create negative karma even if we know better, right? Like knowing better or not knowing better, we still do it because we still have these impulses. And thank goodness for purification. And, it's interesting. I heard Lama Zopa say once, and I'm sure he says this many times, he says, if you can even make it out of this life with a really, really strong imprint not to kill, so that in your future life, you're like one of those little kids that wouldn't even dream of hurting an insect or something. Or, on Facebook now, there's all these like videos of these 4-year-olds that go, I'm not going to eat meat anymore because it hurts. It's so cute. But they have this strong imprint, like nobody taught them that, but they have that compassion imprint of like when they realize that the chicken actually comes from a bird running around the barnyard, they're like, are you kidding me? Like there's no way. So you can see how that's part of the point of practice too. Like those imprints are not lost. And even if we don't attain enlightenment in this life or a high level of realization or whatever, we can really, really have a strong imprint of certain morality that really carries into the next life. And that's kind of what we hope for. Yeah. So it's interesting. I was talking to a friend. I was telling that story to a friend of mine who is a second generation Buddhist. His mother grew up in a Buddhist community, and then he grew up. And I said something like, I was using that example of killing, and I said, wouldn't it be amazing? And I said, when you were a little kid and you just like slap a mosquito or something, and he's kind of looking at me and he goes, actually, he was like 25 at the time we had this conversation. He goes, I've never actually deliberately killed even an insect in my whole life. And I was like, wow, because he was like, that was the way I was raised. And never in this life have I even deliberately, and I was like, his virtue that made him be the child of Buddhists to grow up in a Buddhist retreat, so that he doesn't even have that karma at all from this life to have to purify. And that's kind of, that can happen too. Yeah. Anything else left over behind the pillar? Yes.
Related to Ed's question and mindfulness about mental habits, why is it so much easier for us to see these habits in other people than ourselves?
Yeah, what is that? I have a friend who's a Buddhist teacher, and he says, we always are really clear about our second worst mental affliction. And the worst one, he said, we're so blind to it because it's sort of the subtext of our MO for like everything we do. He goes, ask your friends what your worst one is, because it's just so, kind of really is the subtext for everything. But sometimes the second or third worst one, like I remember when I was in my first long meditation retreat, I went on and on about attachment being my worst mental affliction. And then when I was in long retreat, I was like, oh my God, what about that pride? And I thought, how embarrassing. I've been going on about my attachment, and all my friends are kind of like, yeah, but what about the pride, And then sometimes it takes a lot of practice to even get clear about the worst one. So that becomes interesting. I have arrangements with my highly trusted, very close Buddhist friends, And I do reality checks with them from time to time. Like, what do you see? And how do you think it's going? And please honestly tell me, how you think it's going. Because sometimes we can be super clueless about our behavior even, or, something that's manifesting in us. And so I find that those can be super helpful relationships, and you have to really trust the person so you're not going to be offended when they really tell you, and you have to really want to know. I have one friend, and whenever she starts a conversation, it's the people closest to you that love you the most that'll tell you the truth. And I'm like, okay, what now? But it's really great to have that, check-in of the people closest to us who will really, out of love and care for us, sometimes check us, with some of our stuff. But yeah, why is it that we're so clueless? Yeah, and
I just remember something the whole His Holiness had said about that, like if you see, like if you're looking at other people going, oh well, that person has a big ego or whatever, like you should be looking at yourself.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
to say, okay, that's probably my problem. So,
Oh, absolutely. And that's a great practice to do. I realized that when I was in long retreat, you get very obsessive compulsive, and I've got way too many planets in Virgo for my own good anyway, right? So I did this thing once, and you analyze things in a different way. And I remember at one point when I was in long retreat, I made a list of the people I found the most annoying and what qualities about them I found the most annoying. And then it was kind of like, wah, wah, like holding a mirror. And I realized, it's the people that have the qualities that are the most sort of split off in me, that I most sort of demonize in myself, that actually, and Jung talked about that, like the shadow, and we just sort of like project that onto other people. And I find that to be a really useful practice. When people are really pushing my buttons, I look at what are they doing, and then I try and really own that in myself. And what I found to be really effective, okay, full disclosure, again, when I'm up here facing this direction, I get to confess. So of course, what was it? It was about being really controlling and kind of domineering and all these things that I found so irritating in other people. And I think it was because it was the qualities that I associated with one of my parents, who shall remain nameless. And it reminds me of one of my favorite writers, Anne Lamott, says, you spend your whole life trying not to be one of your parents, so this can happen too. So it's like qualities I associated with one of my parents that I couldn't stand it when it showed up in me. So it's annoying in everyone else because I can't stand those qualities about myself. And then I realized I can actually do some reframing here. Okay, I can look at those same qualities and I can call them kind of domineering, controlling, overbearing, or I can see them as, determined and independent. And then I thought, well, would I have traveled all over India by myself doing these things if I didn't have those qualities? Probably not. So like what I was demonizing, I could also see as my greatest gift is like, yeah, so much. Would I have gone off into long retreat in the desert in a yurt by myself, surrounded by rattlesnakes, if I didn't have this like fierce determination and independence, which can manifest in a way that's overbearing and is a great gift to me. So I think that's really helpful. And then I find like suddenly the minute I sort of integrated all those qualities, all the annoying people just disappeared. Magic. I just did it myself. And then I wasn't doing the shadow projection everywhere because I'd sort of integrated my shadow stuff that was so rejected in me. And it's an amazing process. So we can use that. Like when your buttons get pushed all the time, look at that thing, like Annette said, and then turn it back on yourself and say, how can I integrate? How am I rejecting parts of myself, and how can I integrate that? And then like magic, all the annoying people disappear. So yeah, that's a whole nother story, but really, really helpful technique to do. Yeah, one more and then we'll carry on. Yes.
Sometimes I can be a little self-critical.
Yes. A little? Anybody else share that? I don't think anyone can relate to what you're talking about. Yes. Yeah.
And I feel like I recently started a purification
Yeah, yeah.
Informs it.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
often
Yeah.
wonder, what strategies can I use to make sure, because I feel more guilty?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And what I do for myself is remind myself, like, because I really find for myself there's a continuum of perfectionism and low self esteem. It's actually the same thing, it's just extremes of one continuum. So when I find myself getting into my perfectionist, low self esteem trip, which I do, I, you know, Buddhist ideas have really helped me a lot because I remind myself, so what? Like, I'm supposed to be perfect already? I know I'm completely on the path, still totally subject to karma and delusion. What do I expect? You know, it's a way of giving myself space and then give myself credit for trying and being on the path. Because perfectionism is just this like wrong view. Unless you're an arhat, you're a liberated being that's overcome karma and delusion, like duh, it's going to come up. And just giving yourself, cutting yourself slack without going to the extreme of complacency, but not the extreme of perfectionism either. So I have kind of this little conversation with myself that was just like, well, what did you think? You know, you're not perfect. Learn from it. You know, really try to learn from the experience and not do it again, but don't beat yourself up, you know, because there's really no benefit at all. Like that self-flagellation that makes you so discouraged, and then you sort of just give up because you don't feel like you're ever gonna make it. And we're trying, you know, we're definitely on the path and trying, and then look back and see the progress you have made and rejoice in that. You know, that can be really helpful. Yeah, yeah. All right. Are you guys ready for the 12 links? This is the really cool part. Okay, here we go. Now, before we look at the cool diagram, this is the Wheel of Life. Some of you may be familiar. I stole it from the hallway. No, I didn't really steal it. I am going to return it. So the way that tradition goes, although it is kind of nice, but it's not going to fit in my luggage. And by the way, I have those vows. So the way the tradition goes is this is hung outside the door of any monastery, like of the meditation hall of any monastery. And the way the story goes, this was the only picture that was actually designed by Lord Buddha. So there's kind of a cool story about it. And so Lord Buddha had two kings. He had a lot of disciples who were lay people, including some of the big kings of these areas in India at the time in the Ganges River Valley. And so he had these two disciples that were kings that were related by marriage. I think one was the father-in-law of the other one. So the way it worked, if you're a king in ancient India, you would give the other king these elaborate gifts. And it's like, so the one would give the other one a white elephant laden with jewels, and then the recipient would have to kind of one-up the gift of like 4 elephants laden with more jewels and a troop of dancing girls, and then they'd, reciprocate with even more. So finally, one of the kings went to Lord Buddha and he said, the royal treasury is like empty. I don't know what to give him. And then, of course, Lord Buddha said, the gift of Dharma is the most precious gift you could ever give him. And he said, I will design a painting that explains the whole Buddhist path in like one painting. And then he can use that in his meditation to remind him of everything. And that'll be the most awesome gift that you can give him. So the royal artists were summoned, and Lord Buddha designed this painting. And the kind of monster-looking guy is Yama, the Lord of Death. And then the wheel of samsara, or cyclic existence, the wheel of uncontrolled rebirth, is in his mouth to remind us that death awaits us as long as we're not free from this cycle of uncontrolled rebirth. And then there's little pictures on the outside rim. You can see this sort of rim of little drawings. And all of those drawings represent the 12 links of dependent origination. In the time of Lord Buddha, only the Brahmins, the priestly caste, were mostly the ones that were literate. So most people were not literate. So the Buddha designed pictures that would remind us of the principles and the concepts. Then there's another kind of ring of paintings that represent the 6 realms of existence. And then in the very middle, there's 3 animals that represent the 3 poisons of ignorance, attachment, and aversion. And so, like, everything that we've been talking about so far is represented in this painting. And then you see up in the upper right-hand corner is Lord Buddha. And the way the legend goes was he was modeling for his portrait in the painting. And apparently Lord Buddha was really beautiful and like super tall. For the people there, they say his half-brother Nanda, who was also very tall, was often mistaken for him from a distance because he was like a foot taller than everybody else. He was like over 6 feet tall, and he was super handsome. So apparently he's modeling for his portrait, and he was so beautiful that all the royal artists would be like, just kind of like this. And then they had to hang a sheet and kind of have him in silhouette because he was so beautiful. He was really distracting to the royal artist. So he's on the outside because he's free. He's liberated. So he's outside of the circle. Now, when I first started studying this, when I first started studying Tibetan Buddhism, it was like there's a guy walking along with a cane and he's blind, and then there's a monkey jumping around in a tree, and then there's a house. It was really confusing. And this is supposed to be, by the way, the 12 links of dependent origination is supposed to be what Lord Buddha realized under the Bodhi tree that night that he got enlightened. So it's like super, super important. And I just didn't get it at all. Like I think I was like trying to figure out what the pictures and what does this have to do with my life and what the heck's going on here. And it was very confusing. And then when I was in one of my long meditation retreats, I was really working with it a lot in my meditation and felt like I got sort of the breakthrough of the essence of how we can use this in our practice and in our lives in a really, really practical way. So I'm going to try and transmit that to you. So what I've done is simplify the diagram because, like I said the other day, I'm assuming everybody in the room can read and write. And so you see in your booklet on page 13, this diagram that looks kind of like the budget for a Fortune 500 corporation, this kind of pie chart thing, which hopefully will explain. And then later on, if you want to learn what the monkey jumping around in the tree and, you know, the man with the stick, you can refer to the painting. But let's look at this diagram. And so the 12 kind of squares on the outside perimeter are the 12 links. And I've written the name of the link there. And then we've got a couple of other circles that we're going to look at. Now, there's a couple of different ways of looking at the 12 links, and the traditional way is to look at them in terms of 3 lifetimes. So you see the very middle circle says past, present, and future. So this is the way to look at them in terms of our past life, what's happening in our present life, and then the future life, okay? So in terms of 3 lifetimes. So pay attention to that, past, present, and future. And so we're going to go through the 12. I'll explain what they are. And then what we'll do is look at, because this explains how we keep creating our rebirths and unenlightened existence, right? So the past life to the present life to the future life. This is the cycle. And this explains in detail the cycle of how we keep creating our unenlightened existence. So the point is to cut through that cycle. So we'll look at some of the points that we can use our practice to break through. And it's super cool because it really explains in a lot of detail how our practices can work, you know, and our understandings can work. But let's look at the 12 links. So at the 1 o'clock position is ignorance. Sound familiar? Remember I said that shows up at the top of all of the charts. So it's the same ignorance that we were talking about in the very first chart that we looked at, which is what? Ignorance of what? How things really exist, and then causality. So those are the kind of the 2 flavors. The ultimate nature of existence, how things really exist, we'll talk about that more. And ignorance about the law of cause and effect. So same ignorance there. Then the next one is karmic formation. We've been talking about that all day yesterday, right? Formation of new karmic seeds. So what's in between ignorance and karmic formation? Think about the very first flow chart we had. What's just presumed to be in there? Yeah, mental afflictions, right, or in between. But this is the past life. We're just simplifying, right, for the sake of the diagram. We're just saying, hey, in past life and lives, doesn't need to be just the previous one, because of ignorance, we create new karma, right? So in past lives, that's what's happening. New karmic seeds being created because of ignorance, and then the mental affliction was in there, right, to create the motivating force, the attachment, the aversion, the jealousy, whatever it may be. So past life karma. Then the present life, and this is exaggerated. All of this was happening in a past life too, but we're like really focusing on the details of the present life because this is where we can work. So the first link of the present life is consciousness. And when you think, we'll just think of a human rebirth, we say that the consciousness is associated at the moment of conception with the fertilized egg, right? So it doesn't get associated somehow later on. We say at the moment of conception, the consciousness of this life loaded with those karmic seeds from past lives, right? So what the subtle consciousness that goes from life to life to life, loaded with karmic seeds, right? So associated now with the new life. Name and form, the next link of name and form, that's code for body and mind. So some of you may have studied the 5 aggregates or the 5 heaps, 4 mental ones and 1 form aggregate, right? If you haven't studied the 5 aggregates, don't worry about it. Just think in terms of body and mind. So this is the body and mind of the new rebirth forming in the womb. You know, think about the fetus at this point forming in the womb, forming the body, the different aspects of mind. And then the next one is 6 senses. And this refers to the potential or the ability to have a sense contact. So what are the 6 senses? So sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, tactile. What's the 6th one? Yeah, consciousness of a thought, mental consciousness, right? Mental consciousness. The 6th sense isn't Uri Geller bending spoons or ESP or something like that. It just refers to mental consciousness. So we've got the 5 external sense consciousnesses, and then we have consciousness of a thought, right? Consciousness of some kind of mental event. So that means, in terms of this, of the 12 links, that's the potential formed, right, in the new rebirth. And then there's all those pictures of the fetus forming, and when can it start to hear, and then you start to play it Mozart or French tapes or something to make it smart. I don't think they do that anymore. When was that? The 90s, they were super into that, right? And it can hear, right? One young woman in Canada came to class when she was pregnant, and she came to all these classes when she was pregnant, and then right after she gave birth, she unfortunately had complications and had to have a cesarean, and then I went to the hospital that night, and her mother was holding the baby, and the minute I came in and spoke, the baby just turned its head immediately towards my voice, and the student was like, she's been hearing your voice over the microphone, you know, for months, and she really, and it was like it was just amazing. So like the minute I spoke, she just like turned to my voice. So, you know, so some of these senses definitely are already kind of operational even before birth, but this is just referring to that, the ability to have a sense contact, right? And then the next one is contact. So the Buddha, some of you might be familiar with the Heart Sutra, right, that we recite before teachings. Maybe you've even got teachings on it. The Buddha was constantly talking about the relationship between a sense faculty, that's what this is, a sense faculty, which isn't just the eyeball, but it's everything to do with being able to have a visual perception. It's like that part, I think it's in the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, the eyeball, all of that. And then the object, and then the consciousness that arises as a result of that contact. So the Buddha talked about that all the time. And in the Heart Sutra, he's like, no ear, no nose, talking about the sense faculty, no object of that consciousness, no consciousness that arises from its own side, because that's the Heart Sutra is talking about emptiness. But he kept emphasizing this relationship between, you know, the sense faculty, the sense object, and the consciousness that arises. And that happens due to contact, right? So right now I'm having my eye sense consciousness is having contact with Lori's black t-shirt. And so my mind is having a sense consciousness of black t-shirt. So it's giving rise to a consciousness in my mind of black t-shirt. And that's going on all the time. Sometimes these sense faculties are called gateways, right? That's the translation of the Sanskrit word is gateway. Because there's the gateway to like all of this input all the time. So this is happening like with all of our senses all the time. Sometimes we use sight as an example just because for most of us, if we're not vision impaired, it's our most compelling sense, right? So I'll use that as an example. But it's happening all the time with all of our senses. They're the gateway to all of this input, right? So that's what that one is, contact with an object. And those of you who might have studied mental factors, we say contact and feeling are omnipresent mental factors because they're going on in every moment of consciousness. We're having contact with some kind of sense object or a thought, right? It's our mind's job description to think. So we're always having some kind of, contact with some object, even if it's just a mental one, even if you're in a sensory deprivation tank. Not that I've ever done that. That kind of freaks me out. I mean, even then you're touching the water, even though it's supposed to give you a neutral experience or whatever, but there's always something happening. And then the next link, as a result of that contact, we always, with every moment of consciousness, have a feeling. And this is not a synonym of emotion. This has three basic flavors. Yeah, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, that's all. Just those three flavors. This isn't like, existential angst and joy and exuberance. This is like pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. So every contact with an object, right? This is omnipresent. A lot of it is neutral, and we talked about this yesterday. I said, this chair, pretty neutral. It's fine. It's not like, at all. But it's fine. It's not at all like, get me out of here. So a lot of sort of the background noise of our unenlightened existence is neutral feeling. And then there'll be blips of, I passed these cookies. I'm really trying to like ignore sweets, but I passed these like half and half of them, and I'm like, it's probably like dark chocolate and white chocolate. Oh man, it might be shortbread in there. And like, I don't know. Then there'll be a moment like that of like, ripening of pleasant or unpleasant, whatever it may be, right? So that's happening all the time. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, feeling. Then guess what happens? The next step, craving. And this can refer to either craving for more of the pleasant or craving for less of the unpleasant. Even though it's craving, which in our mind we think of attachment and that, which it is most of the time. Remember, for most of us, we've got about 1,000 attachment thoughts to every aversion thought. But it's either this is like, I wouldn't mind having more of those cookies, or that fennel. I was telling somebody the other day, they're like, what do you eat? And I was like, everything but fruitcake with those weird candied bits in it, and like fennel, anise, licorice, So it could be craving of like, oh, that salad had fresh fennel in it. Oh, you know, craving to be, you know, dissociated, to not have that. And then the next is this craving intensifies to grasping. You're starting to think of ways to get more of the good stuff, or ways to be, you know, separated from the icky stuff. So this is just like, ooh, that was nice. Wouldn't mind more of that. This is like, what can I do about it? How can I get it? And then the next step, becoming, is you do something about it. Fresh karma created, right? So becoming is, you know, new karmic seed. You act on that craving and grasping to do some action. And then guess what? Future life, again, loaded with karma. Your consciousness goes to the future life, which is characterized by birth, aging, and death, and everything else in between. Right? So this is explaining how our unenlightened existence is created. And these are the details, right? So this is like parsed out. I mean, obviously birth and aging and death happens in the present life and the past life. But this is really showing us in detail how, you know, we create the cause for our next rebirth. So let's see. Yeah, let's start before we're going to take a break in a minute, but let's start analyzing. So where do you think we can cut through? Where do you think we can break through this cycle? Because the whole point is to get free of this. This is what's perpetuating our uncontrolled rebirth from life to life to life. So what can we do?
Craving. I think craving would be the target.
So what do we do?
I guess over time, by cutting our mental afflictions, learn to no longer have attachment and aversion to certain stimuli.
Okay. Is there any logic or understanding we can apply that will help us do that? Or if we just kind of going, oh, the Buddha said not to like things. So the Buddha's trying to be a spoil sport and ruin all my fun. So what's an effective way of doing that?
Understanding cause and effect.
And how does that,
Like how
okay.
you're working on it just repeatedly,
And how does that help? You're onto something. I'm just trying to get you there.
So what do you say? How would it help? What do you mean?
Yeah, like, okay, there's a way that we can practice in a way that I think is very, not very beneficial of, oh, the Buddha said not to be attached. Therefore, I'm just going to try and like not like things much and suppress, you know, my happiness because it could lead to which just frustrates us. And we think that the Buddha is trying to spoil all of our fun, and then we give up in frustration, and that can be common. But I'm asking, is there a deeper level of understanding that we can apply to help us do that? Anybody else have Ed? Yeah, and then
In
maybe.
terms of like a personal intervention, contact.
Yeah.
Because you can consciously figure out what secondary causes, conditions to the maturation of a karmic seed are. So, meet your friends for coffee, don't meet them at the bar.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
by shaping the contacts that you have, you're sort of denying the karmic seed of light and water.
Okay, good. Mimi, you had something. Yeah, we're just going to brainstorm and then we'll go back. Tell me how that works.
You don't just go far into, like you say, you know, that Lord Buddha was trying to spoil my fun. But you don't go too much towards the other side, so you keep your balance. And whatever it is that either comes in your mind and you have to actions or...
Okay, great. And you got something.
I think it's really realizing how much suffering comes out of those desires, that the good things seem that praise and blame are the same.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah, ooh, lots of, Bob?
They cut the grasping by realizing that what's appearing doesn't exist the way that it appears.
Mm.
And if you can realize that, you'll kind of, you get a sense that there isn't anything there to grasp.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
trying to grasp doesn't exist that way.
Okay,
To grasp.
okay, good. Yeah, you had something.
The word that comes to my mind is renunciation.
Okay, and what does that mean to you?
I think it's all applying to all the 12.
Yeah,
It applies to all the 12 links, but it all has to come from the realization of true renunciation of realizing the emptiness of this life and its
okay, okay. And then there were a couple of, yeah, Ellen.
I'm an ignorance, a deep, deep understanding of ignorance.
Yeah, yeah. So a kind of cutting through by understanding that ignorance. And that's coming up. A couple of people are mentioning emptiness, which is the antidote to ignorance. Jeffrey, did you have something? Yeah.
Thinking about how to exaggerate the helpfulness or harmfulness of a thing by visualizing and connecting a harmful thing to a who. Is there some visualizing techniques you can do?
Okay.
Connect from one thing to another that's even more obviously.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, in my mind, I think it's beginning with the refuge, and then moving forward, knowing that Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are there to support you and help you along this path.
Okay.
Process.
Okay. And you got something. Yeah.
My understanding is, and it's probably wrong, but like it's something about grasping right at the time of death, because that you have this throwing karma that throws you into the next life. So it's that moment that is the most important moment, where all your practice is geared towards that moment, so that your mind is habituated to virtuous
Mm.
actions and thoughts. So you can have a virtuous action or thought at the very moment of death,
Mm.
throwing you into the next life.
Okay.
A higher rebirth
Wow.
without grasping.
We got all kinds of good, juicy ideas. Yeah, Chris.
I don't know what level you'd be hitting at, but in my own experience, what I do is that if am I chasing pleasure because I'm trying to avoid some sort of disturbing affliction
Mm.
now?
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's how I would make my choice, whether, am I chasing this food or this alcohol because I'm trying to avoid something in my life
Like,
versus
yeah.
this just might be fun right now.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's how I sort of try to make
So kind of how much is it just a distraction from what's really going on for me right now? Okay. Wow. You guys are amazing. Any more brainstorm? Yeah.
I think the critical link is between craving and grasping, and probably, direct realization of emptiness.
That could help, huh? What do you think? All right. Anything else? I'm going to keep you in suspense for 10 minutes because we're going to have a break. And then we'll come back and look at all of your ideas and apply them to the chart. I just thought I'd do that to be really mean. Yeah.
Is there a name for this portrait, this painting?
Yes, this is called the Wheel of Life.
Okay.
Is usually what it's called, the Wheel of Life. And then within it is the 12 links. I haven't, and yeah, come up during the break and take a look at this if you haven't looked at it yet. And this is an accurate one. You know, it's funny because a lot of times centers will have these, and I think the teachers haven't really checked them. In Nepal, you can buy these paintings that are painted for tourists, and then you have to ask for the back room where they paint the correct ones for practitioners. Like they have, the artist will paint just some cool looking thing, you know, and this happens to me all the time, is like somebody will go, wow, look at this amazing tanka I bought. And I'm like, oh, it's like all wrong, you know. So this one's correct. So you're allowed to look at this one. Sometimes, you know, I'll be teaching this in a center and they'll give me the tanka and say, oh, you can use this. And I'll be like, no, I can't. We'll just roll that up and put it away. Yeah, so you have to, if you're going to Kathmandu shopping, you know, make them take you to the back room for practitioners. Yeah, Ed.
Name and form, that's the five aggregates?
Yes.
How is that consciousness different than the consciousness in the box?
Yeah, so this is just forming. Now, the consciousness there is, the consciousness aggregate is basically all six. And then we're just emphasizing now all six of those. We're kind of just parsing it out.
The consciousness, name and form, that's the five aggregates. The consciousness before it.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, this is just, so the consciousness in the five aggregates is more of the six sense consciousnesses. There's a very, very subtle consciousness that goes from life to life that is not having those six consciousnesses because it doesn't have a sense faculty associated with it. It's just carrying the karmic seeds. That's basically its only function, is that very subtle consciousness. And then with the sense faculties, then it has the potential for the six consciousnesses.
It's mirai.
Yeah.
Mirai. Consciousness is the mirai.
No. No, we'll talk about that too after the break. Yeah, yeah. All right, let's have a break. Then we'll come back and dig into it. So 10 minutes, 20 after 11. Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about the mere eye.
And then we've got like this one's actually really good because yeah, the anti-gods. So then you have the philosophers, and then the and then this is exactly that's what's going on. That's gonna come through the nose now.
Described in detail in the
I gotta carry it.
Carry on my wayward child. And then the two are complementary.
Yeah, they are.
For everything nowadays. Even when I have to go through stuff, I don't wear glasses. I sit put on camera and I look at everything to get
That's smart. That's using technology to your advantage.
Yeah.
Do what you gotta do.
Yeah, it's a good one. Actually, it shows all the, like, a lot of the different hell realms. In the bottom part, all those little squares are like different hell realm sufferings with the cold ones on the right and the hot ones on the left. And yeah, that has quite a lot of good detail.
Going to Kathmandu in 2 weeks.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if there's anything you need, let
Yeah.
me know. She'll pick it up for you. She's gonna do the pilgrimage with Venerable.
Oh, that's great. Wow, awesome. Awesome. Oh, that's very good.
So this is the only picture that's from Buddha and
That's the way the legend goes, yeah. Yeah. As a gift from one king to the other.
And any correct wheel of life is one that follows this pattern, this order? Like
Well,
this?
what it is sometimes the pictures on the outside will be in the wrong order. Like sometimes it'll look close, but they'll be in the wrong order. Like the artist won't carefully follow the order, like so that's the most common mistake is like all the pictures are there, but they're not really quite in the right
In the
order.
proper order.
Or sometimes they'll just, sometimes I've seen really bad ones where they know there's supposed to be 12 pictures on the outside wheel and they just make up anything.
So
Sometimes.
eventually you probably develop an eye for knowing
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
that's correct.
And
You're like,
sometimes
that's correct,
I've
not
seen
correct.
like deity paintings where the implements and things that they're holding are all wrong, so you can't really use it for your meditation practice at all because it's all. But I don't blame them. It's like tourists just buy something to hang in their living room
Ignorance.
wall and they're
Some
not a
degree.
practitioner at all, so it's like easier for them to. Yeah. But I remember being in one Tanka shop many years ago and I was looking for a specific image, and it was when I was a lay person before I was a nun, and I was talking to the guy, and at a certain point I said something that was like the key word that made him realize that I knew what I wanted, and so he goes, "Oh, a practitioner, come with me into the back."
That's so interesting. That's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
interesting.
because
I think
like the front display was just for the tourists, and then the back was like the
Are they more expensive
proper.
than that too? Are they like more
Probably, yeah. I mean,
Probably.
they're better quality.
delicate, yeah,
They're more
more
detailed. They're painted by people who know what they're doing more. So yeah.
Very interesting.
Are you feeling comfortable temperature-wise?
Yeah, today's good actually because it's cooler. Yeah. But I think it is the humidity because I'm used to how dry it is in California. So I think that was why I was overheating the last couple of days. I just kind of wasn't used to the
Yeah, in
humidity.
Massachusetts, you kind of like cook from the inside out because of the humidity. It's very
Yeah,
unusual
no, I
feeling.
really notice that when I'm in places that are humid, it's like, oh my God,
Yeah.
the humidity.
So at some point today, is it possible for us to have like an open Q&A where we can ask questions like about just general topics?
Okay,
Will we have time for that? We might not have time for that.
what we could do, Oh no, they're having a puja at 4, so that's.
'Cause I know
Gosh,
you have
there's
to- you
still
have to
quite a
cover-
lot I
yeah, you have
really
to
want to
so much
cover.
ground. Maybe
There's
next
still
weekend
quite
we
a
can do
lot.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, because it is nice to have that. I wish we'd sort of organize that separately. You know, because sometimes when you come to a center, it is really nice to have just sort of an open mic session where
Yeah.
people can just ask whatever's on their mind.
Yeah, because a lot of people here have questions. that
Yeah,
don't seem to be able to
yeah.
get
I'm just trying to
answers.
think because I don't think we can fit it in. Our schedule's so
Yeah.
packed already. I don't
Will-
know.
will
You know,
next
as a
weekend
separate.
end early, like at 3 as well?
I'll have to ask Marianne
Yeah.
because I'm not sure. I mean, we could tack on. Oh, but there's a puja next weekend
Yeah.
too.
Oh, next weekend
Shoot,
too?
I think so. We'll have to ask
Yeah.
Marianne what the schedule is because I can't remember.
Yeah, we definitely have to clear out of here to let them set up the
Yes.
puja, but maybe we could meet in one of the other rooms if anyone has
Yeah,
questions and
yeah.
answers. I have questions
I
about the
mean,
basic-
I'd be fine to sit in the lounge like after class finishes, and if anybody has questions
Yeah.
before the puja, I mean, I'm fine to
Yeah.
do that, and that might be the easiest way. I don't know if we could all
Well,
fit in there,
today,
but
we have to clear everything out of here. We
yeah,
have to go in the
I mean,
kitchen and
everybody
clean
has to.
everything
I
out.
know.
Because
It's
it's
going to be
Sunday.
hard. But yeah, let me talk to Marianne. We can
Yeah.
see if there's a way we could squeeze that in somehow
just give
to
people
one
that
of our
option.
sessions. Yeah, yeah.
Some of my worst karma sins have been created by my curiosity. So, yesterday when you talked about your vows only allow you to have 15 possessions now.
Yeah.
What would be those possessions?
Oh, you know, most of them, I mean, we can't live like that because we don't live in monasteries where the other stuff is provided. Like most of us that live on our own, we have a lot more than that. It's all the different robes, our begging bowl, our razor, a water filter. I mean, it's mostly just about your different robes and the other requisites that you need,
So
which is
let's say if you need 2 or 3 robes, that's part of the
Yeah.
gifting items.
Yeah,
that-
yeah. I mean, for very, very traditionally in the time of the Buddha, it really was basically limited to like your robes. And then you have the other robes for bathing because in the time of the Buddha you'd bathe in a river. So you'd have
Yeah, you
something
have
kind
to
of like a sari that you put on that you'd use to bathe. And then, yeah, and your begging bowl, your razor, you know, a couple of other things that you need, like bandages if you have a wound or something. I mean, that's kind of it. And then that's the 13. You know, it's a short list. But that was, like I say, now we have a lot more than that because we don't live in monasteries. We don't beg for our food. You know, there aren't so many of those other things that are kind of provided for us by the lay people in a monastic situation. So, for example, I have all my Dharma books for reference. I mean, mostly what I have is books. Like, if it weren't for the books, everything would fit into kind of one suitcase, but it's really, for me, mostly kind of my personal books and references and teaching materials and all of that. Like, when I moved from Canada last year, I moved in a small hatchback car, and if it hadn't been for the books, I would have been able to just move with kind of 2 suitcases, you know, so it really isn't much because, I mean, I'll have like some sweaters and things like that, but it really, I don't have any other clothes than my robes. I don't have any lay clothes. So otherwise it's just a couple of jackets and it is, it's great, you know, no makeup, no hair products. It's, I've traveled to India with a, yeah, yeah.
Just taking care
of the hair, I know. I've traveled to India with like a day pack in the overhead compartment of the airplane because it's like in the summer when you don't need any extra jackets or anything, it's just like a change of robes and a toothbrush basically and your razor. You know, that's kind of all you need. Yeah, it's very liberating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's okay to be curious. Oh, I've got to get them back. We have a lot to discuss. Come back, you guys.
Who is in the upper left corner? It's Buddha too?
Well, you know, in that one, I mean, he's usually pointing to the moon, and it's usually the moon. Let me take a look at this and see who's...
right? Because that would be in 5.
He's pointing towards
the moon. Usually
Over
the
there.
moon is over there. It kind of looks like on the top of it. But that's kind of unusual. Usually you see planets with the moon. Oh, maybe that's...
I hate to draw a terrible analogy, but these are sort of like stained glass windows in the Middle Ages. They were the,
Yeah, they were the way, yeah, exactly. Like through pictures, because people didn't read and write. Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Come back. Okay, so we had some good ideas of where we could cut through the wheel. And so let's start looking at that, where we can kind of cut through this cycle. So Ed had said at contact. So let's talk about that place. And this gets into the discussion of causes and conditions. Okay, so I kept hinting at this yesterday and saying, okay, I'm going to talk about causes and conditions. So we say that, you know, there's a certain karmic cause for something, and then there are the conditions that enable that karma to sprout. And using again the analogy of the seeds, a karmic seed. So you imagine you have a seed packet with broccoli seeds in it, and it's dark and dry, and it's just going to sit there in your garden shed until you put it in a pot with soil and water it and put it out in the sunlight. So the water and the soil and the sunlight are the conditions that enable that seed to sprout, right? But no amount of water and soil and sunlight without a seed is going to cause a broccoli plant. You need the seed, you know. But if the seed doesn't have the water, soil, and sunlight, it's not going to sprout. So you need both things coming together. And it's the same with our karmic seeds. So what happens when they're that potential carried from life to life to life? It's exactly like the broccoli seed in the seed packet. They haven't met with the right conditions to ripen yet into a result. So one of the ways that we can practice is think about the conditions that give rise to our karma ripening into some kind of an unpleasant outcome, and avoid those conditions for the short term. Like Ed gave the example of meet your friends in a coffee shop instead of a bar, because you know the conditions of hanging out with your friends and drinking too much could easily be a condition for all kinds of karmic seeds to ripen in unwanted ways, right? So one of the ways that we practice is just to be smart about the conditions in our life. I had this one student, and he said, you know, Thanksgiving is such a terrible holiday, like, right? I mean, it's just the worst. It's like you get together with all of your relatives and you eat too much, and then you watch football, and everybody starts, you know, snapping at each other. And it's just awful. And so I had this one student, and right before, we're talking about this, and right before Thanksgiving, he comes to me and he goes, I'm really dreading next Thursday. And I'm like, what's up? And he goes, well, you know, my older sister is so patronizing about my career, and she always says that thing that pushes my buttons, and then I yell at her, and then mom cries, and everybody's like upset, and it's terrible. And I go, oh, okay, well, let's like think about how you can work with this. And so he comes back the next week and he says, I did it. And I was like, what? And he goes, well, sure enough, go in. Thanksgiving dinner is over the cranberry sauce, and as predicted, my sister said that thing. And I go, so what did you do? And he goes, I stood up, walked out of the house, got in my car, and drove away. And I was like, yes. And he just goes, I knew, you know, I was going to snap. So I just got out of the situation before I snapped and said something unfortunate. And he goes, they all thought it was weird. They're calling me on my cell phone. They're worried. But he goes, it was so much better than having a fight with the sister, and mom cries, and Thanksgiving's ruined, and everybody leaves. So sometimes being smart about the conditions in the short term. This is a temporary fix, right? It's not a permanent solution by any means, but temporarily being smart about the conditions that could give rise to some sort of a unwanted, experience can be smart. A lot of our monastic vows are about protecting our root vows by protecting us from the conditions that could lead to a breach of us breaking our vow. For example, Buddhist monastics have a celibacy vow. So our celibacy vow is like, don't have sex. So in order to protect that, there's all of these other lesser vows that create kind of like concentric circles around the bullseye of breaking our celibacy vow. Like, don't be alone in a room with the door closed with somebody you're attracted to. If you don't do that, you're never going to go to the bullseye. And like all of these other levels of protection to protect from contact, right? So cutting through here. Now, it doesn't always work. And as we said, it can lead to that Lord Buddha's trying to spoil all my fun thing. So it's not the most effective place for our practice, but it is a good place. In the meantime, when you're trying to work on, we say our mind is kind of like a little sapling. And while it's still sort of vulnerable and weak, we need to protect it with a nice rabbit-proof fence and like tape the trunk so that the, deer don't chew on it. Once it's a big, strong oak tree, who cares? We're not going to have to protect it so much. But one of the smart things we can do in our practice is protect our minds from these situations that could lead to unwanted outcomes. So that is one place. And then Ellen said ignorance, right? So we say, this is the root right up here. This is this source, for sure, right? Trying to get an understanding of the ultimate nature of reality, meditating on emptiness, absolutely cuts things at the root. It's really, really hard, It may not, eventually, absolutely. Then the whole thing just crumbles because the first step is just, it's like those towers you built of blocks when you were a little kid, and then you're like, pull the thing and it crashes down and you're like, wee, the whole thing comes tumbling down. But it takes a lot of practice, as we shall see, because we're going to talk about emptiness in a minute, to get to that point of especially having that direct realization to really eliminate that ignorance. So I'm going to suggest now a great place to practice, in addition to those other two places. Oh, and then what's your name again? I forgot. Laura, yeah. So Laura said, what about here before the next life, right? So we're stopping the rebirth, and we say at very, very high levels of realization, there's meditations that the very advanced yogis can do actually in the intermediate state before the next life to get liberation at that point. And this is one of the things that we really emphasize in Buddhism, creating the conducive conditions to be able to actually do those meditations with the very subtle consciousness that becomes manifest during the death process. But again, super advanced practice. It said Lama Tsongkhapa attained liberation from samsara in the intermediate state after his death, in the intermediate state. Because of that meditation that he did, he attained liberation then, but very high level of realization. So there's a possibility of here. I want to go back to this point between feeling and craving, because this is where I think we can use what we've been studying this weekend to super breakthrough. This is like a huge, huge breakthrough. And let's look at this. So we'll use the metaphor of chocolate cake. You can substitute whatever the real example of your craving is. We won't go into the explicit details of it. Contact with the chocolate cake, right, gives rise to a pleasant feeling, gives rise to a sense of, wow, I wouldn't mind a second piece. That was really nice. gives rise to, I'm going to do something about it, right? Gives rise to acting on that craving, right? Acting on the craving and grasping. For the chocolate cake, it's innocuous. There's not going to be any non-virtue unless you break the window of the bakery and steal it, but it's, a pretty innocuous example, but it isn't always. Your friend's husband, who's really cute, who flirts with you at parties, par exemple, and fill in the blank, of the ones that could give rise to non-virtues there. But check it out. We haven't looked at this circle of cause and effect. And this is the key to this. We think there's a cause and effect relationship here. We think the chocolate cake caused the pleasant feeling, don't we? We totally do, don't we? We think, oh, the chocolate cake, the cute boyfriend, the vacation in Hawaii is the cause of the pleasant feeling. But check it out. Guess what? That's an effect of past karma. Remember I said yesterday, virtue causes pleasant feeling. Non-virtue causes unpleasant feeling. The cake is not the cause. The cake is the condition. It's not the cause. Right? So one of our brands of ignorance that gets us in so much trouble is the ignorance thinking that there's a cause and effect relationship here. But the fact that you have chocolate cake in your life and that it tastes good are both the result of your past karma. So you want future rebirths filled with chocolate cake that tastes delicious. Serve others. Don't break the bakery window. Don't do that. But it's our misunderstanding about that cause and effect relationship. We think the thing is the cause, the thing is the condition. What's the proof of that?
You can eat chocolate cake and not taste a thing, especially if you're angry or distracted.
Exactly.
Or you can eat the whole thing and go, what the heck did that taste?
Exactly. It doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. If it were the cause, it would always work. If those things were the cause of your happiness, it would always work. And it doesn't. Why doesn't the chocolate cake always taste good? Why doesn't it taste good to everyone? Why does the medicine work for some people and not for others? Right? Why do, from one year to the next, something gave us pleasure, now we could care less? If it were the cause, it would always work, and it doesn't, because it's a condition, and it depends on our karma. So this is really, really a big deal, right? Is reminding yourself in that moment, and that was what I was trying to lead the witness here to get to, because you were so close. We use that understanding to cut before the craving. And the craving doesn't arise not just because we think, oh, Lord Buddha said not to be attached, so I guess I better not be attached. We use our understanding of cause and effect, our understanding of the difference between the cause and the condition to remind ourselves in that moment when the craving is coming up, especially if we think that it could cause us to do something non-virtuous. We say, we misunderstand, we mix up the how and the why. Why we feel good is good karma. How we felt good is the chocolate cake, right? But we think that the chocolate cake is the why. It's just the how. It's just the condition. It's not the why. The why is our karma. And this is why His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I had a friend whose dad was the international director of Four Seasons hotels around the whole world or something. And so my friend and her mom were both Buddhist students, and so her dad would get His Holiness the best suite at the Four Seasons whenever he would teach in some city, which apparently not that I've ever been there. Actually, she went to one once and invited me, and I was like, oh, I think that would freak me out, to go into it'd just be too weird for a Buddhist nun to go into the suite. Anyway, His Holiness, they would offer this wonderful hotel suite with, the jacuzzi and the room service and the whole shebang. He could enjoy it just fine without any craving or grasping. I am sure. When the limousine was taking him to the airport, he didn't look over his shoulder at the Four Seasons Hotel in Central Park and go, oh, that was so nice. When is that going to happen again? Because he had no misunderstanding. It was like, my virtue served me up this great experience. I can enjoy it, no sweat, with no craving at all, with that Teflon rather than the Velcro. But for us, because of the ignorance, misunderstanding, the how and the why thing, we think this is the cause, right? And if you can remind yourself of that, and I say, widen the gap between feeling and craving. We can't change the way we feel, by the way. That's a result of past karma. You can't change that. Unfortunately, things are still going to suck for a long time. I'm sorry to break it to you, right? Because we still have these deep pockets of karma. So it's still going to be that we're going to have experiences of that. But can we transform? In Buddhism, there's all these thought transformation teachings, Lojong, for some of you that have studied, right? It isn't saying, oh, I'm just going to pretend that everything is wonderful. Oh, it's kind of unpleasant, but I'm just going to pretend that it's not. No, it's about how to cut through here. Take it as a lesson. Take the enemy as a lesson and an object to practice patience. That's all about how do we not react to the experiences we're having, because this is going to be happening for a long time. It's going to be a mixed bag of pleasant and unpleasant. People start to meditate and they're like, come to me. I've been meditating for 2 months and I still have like crappy things happen to me. Guess what? Join the club, and it's going to be going on for quite some time now. But how do we at least cut through with our understanding? And this is where, like today, this is going to take a while. We can get there, and that's will ultimately make the whole thing fall apart, is our direct realization of emptiness. We also should work here, and in the meantime, think of those sense contacts that are so compelling that it's almost impossible to remember this point. The cute guy, oh, he's not the cause of the pleasure, it's my karma. Yeah, see how that works out for you. So maybe to avoid those ones that are so compelling that you can't be mindful and create a gap here. One of my students in California, he was like, gap? What gap? He's like, it's just like wing, and you just done it. And for most of us, that's true. And this is where our plain old-fashioned mindfulness practice comes in. If you feel that pleasant feeling, stop before you go to craving, grasping, and more karma. And it's hard, and it takes a lot of training. But the more you habituate to this way of thinking, then you can kick in with that mindfulness in that moment and just go, wow. Because think about the negative ones. I mean, the chocolate cake, like I said, innocuous unless you're going to like bust into the bakery, which you're not going to do. But let's say the yelling boss at work, okay? So contact with, the bright red face with the anger expression. For those of you that studied Wednesday and Thursday night class, that anger expression, spittle coming out, decibels of yelling coming out. How does that feel? Really unpleasant. What's the worst thing that you could do when that's happening? Yell back. You've just bought yourself future lives filled with yelling bosses. Congratulations. Retaliation to that experience is the dumbest thing you can do. If in that moment you can remember this thing and go, awesome, another one down. The reason this is happening is because I yelled at my employees in past lives. I'm now experiencing the result of that cause that I created. If I react with patience, it doesn't mean you're a doormat. If somebody's abusive to you, it doesn't just mean, oh, great, that's my karma. I mean, you don't go to that extreme. But you do remind yourself so that you don't retaliate. And non-retaliation, and for those of you who are going to study Bodhisattva vows next week, that is one of the fundamental kind of ethics in Buddhism, is non-retaliation, just because it's smart. It's not because it's nice. It's just the only smart thing to do, is not to retaliate towards harm with harmful behavior, right? And not to respond to, the object of attachment with something stupid like stealing or sexual misconduct either, right? And anything that will cause, negative karma. So that's all three of these places, but this is one that we can use what we've been learning now, and especially reminding yourself, it's the how, it's not the why. The chocolate cake's the how, it's not the why for the pleasant experience. And then that's the key to enjoying whatever you want without craving and grasping, is really by understanding that. Otherwise, you're going to think, oh, the Buddha's just trying to give me to get up, get rid of my fun. When we get ordained as monastics, they go through this whole training program where they teach you your vows. And I always think they should really teach us this, because this gives the strength to why you're practicing, this morality, and why you're keeping your vows. I mean, this is really what explains it. Don't just give us a list of our vows. Explain to us, if we don't know already. Why? Because then you're like, as Lama Zopa says, then your vows are freedom. You relate to them as freedom. Otherwise, he said, if you have a wrong understanding, you relate to your vows as a prison. If you have the right understanding, you relate to your vows as freedom, because you just see how they'll enable you to get free of this cycle, keeping that ethical behavior. So any questions about that? Isn't that cool, by the way? Is that cool? Can I get some positive visual feedback there? Okay, Jeffrey's like doing the wave. Great. Yeah. Did you have a question? Yeah.
So, between, you're feeling your craving, what have you, we're only going to be considering that around the things that are non-virtuous, because you're thinking with the chocolate cake.
Yeah.
Versus, obviously, the thing of killing or whatever,
Yeah. I think it's good to start with, and this is where you can go back to your karma quiz. What are some of your more problematic behaviors, right? And start there. I think it's really good to eventually, we'll sort of be able to do it with everything. But I think for now, you got the results of your karma quiz. You know what some of the non-virtues are that you're struggling with. How can you apply this to those? And start there. Because it can be quite overwhelming if you go, oh my God, in every moment of sense experience, I have to remember this thing that it's not the that's a lot to ask. But start at least with those things that you're stupid about, because you're still experiencing the cause. Or when you did your karma quiz, you're like, oh yeah, I know that I really have this problem with divisive speech. Backtrack, that's the new karma that you're constantly creating. What's going on there? How are you misunderstanding the situation that causes you to do that action? So merge that piece of information from what we did yesterday afternoon with this, and start there. And then you notice that gives you, because it gives you the wisdom to be the antidote to your negative behavior. It's not just like, oh, this is on some list that the Buddha said don't do it. You really understand why. And that's why I think this is so cool, because parsing out the mechanism of how our minds work out of ignorance and how to stop it gives us sort of the real understanding and the wisdom that's such a framework for our practice, in a way, because you don't have to just go, oh, I don't understand why, and why can't I do that? And it's just, so use that, bring that information in and start with the ones that scored high on your karma quiz. And then you get into the habit, you start breaking those bad habits, and then the more you get used to this, you relate it to everything. Gradually, you keep reminding yourself this. I've been teaching this for quite some time, and I've got students in California, and one of my students said, this diagram is next to my meditation seat. You know, sometimes I'll go in my students' houses and it's on the refrigerator. They're like, I'm just reminding myself of this thing all the time because this is like so key to my practice. You know, it's super practical of what you can do like off the cushion to remind yourself of this stuff. Yeah.
If there's something that isn't a non-virtuous thing, but it's something that you do spend a lot of time
Yeah.
with your brain.
Yeah. I think you can work with that too, right? How much, I mean, Chris was saying before, like looking at his distractions, looking at, even though it's innocuous, it's just the internet or food or whatever, you know, nothing non-virtuous, but yeah, on a subtler level, I think you're right. We can look at what is my mind grasping after to distract or whatever it may be, or just looking at that tendency to always be looking for the next thing that's going to make me feel good. And then at a deeper level, it's like, how is that distracting me from looking at my mind? You know, because I think all of those distractions that we engage in, you know, is as a way of distracting ourselves from our pain. You know, and we don't want to just sit with our minds. There's a study that was done recently, and I swear to you this is true. I couldn't even make this up. You know, so this is true, and it was a study by these psychologists, and they published it in, it was either like Science magazine or, you know, Nature or one of these like peer-reviewed proper journal. So these psychologists took volunteers. First, they gave them an electrical shock, and then they took the volunteers that said that they would pay money not to feel that electrical shock. I mean, it wasn't like electrocution level, it was just uncomfortable. And then they took the volunteers that say, hey, I'd pay you $10 not to feel that electrical shock. So they put them in a room with a chair, the electric shock machine, and nothing else for 15 minutes. Guess how many people chose to give themselves the electric shock that they had previously said that they would pay not to feel, just to not be alone with their minds for 15 minutes with no stimulation whatsoever? It was gendered, I have to say. Something like 75% of the men and 25% of the women chose to self-administer the electric shock. I mean, when I heard this, I was just like, what? That they said that they would pay money not to feel. One guy shocked himself 110 times in 15 minutes. That's just so crazy that any stimulation at all, even unpleasant. So if you struggle with your breath awareness meditation, you know, this is quite reassuring. You know, at least you're not like jabbing yourself with a knife instead of just sitting. Isn't that crazy? And that happened last year or the year before it was published in a journal. So that's kind of like what Chris was saying, is like anything but my mind. Like, God forbid I would just sit in, you know, with my own mind for like 15 minutes, even to the point of this study. I thought that was just wild. Yeah.
Can you have an attachment to suffering? Because I see it in my own life. I really enjoy the suffering, but
Absolutely, yeah.
I beat myself up for it. Why am I, you know, I don't know. I get guilty.
Well, you know, the great Vietnamese master Thich Nhat Hanh said once, you can get people to give up just about anything but their suffering. And we're going to talk about that this afternoon. Our identity. So often our suffering forms this huge part of our identity, right? And even though it's unpleasant, if you have an identity of a victim or the one that's so put upon by everyone and oh man, you don't want to give that up. Even though it's a cause of suffering, you totally don't want to give that up. I think, you know, it kind of goes along with that thing of like, why don't people leave abusing spouses? It's the familiar. And even if the familiar is suffering, at least I know what that feels like. Oh, yeah. Oh, big time. You know, a lot of us, and I think it's really true, especially it, you know, for a lot of us, it forms a huge part of our identity. And it's like, who would I be without my precious suffering that I sort of nurture and, you know, defend and protect? Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's so crazy, isn't it? But it's, yeah, for sure we do that. Definitely, definitely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. I know, and that's true. And it's like how to respond constructively without being a doormat, you know, and that's hard and it takes a lot of wisdom. Is there something that you can do that is not non-virtuous but still will deal with the situation? You know, but it's mostly about stopping yourself from retaliating in a way that's going to be destructive to you, to the other person, to the whole situation. And then in that situation, there may be a way that you can deal with it constructively to stop that tendency of that person or the abuse or something like that. But it takes a lot of wisdom of really thinking through and just going, but you're absolutely right. There is a danger. And sometimes in Buddhism in general, people hear, oh, Buddhists are supposed to be kind and compassionate. So you think you have to be a doormat, or we talked about this the other day, or just do anything that anyone wants you to do for them, even if it's not actually anything that's beneficial for them. And sometimes the most compassionate, kind thing to do is to be harsh and to, you know, kind of set boundaries, draw limits, and just say, if people are mistreating you, out of compassion, also saving them for their non-virtue in a non-reactive, non-angry way, saying, you know, I'm just not going to let you talk to me like that anymore. And say it in a way that's coming out of compassion, but is really clearly drawing a boundary. And it's hard, and we're not really used to that, but you can just, you know, being a good Buddhist does not mean you never set limits and you just let people do, you know, because it's not actually good for them. It really habituates them to doing non-virtuous things, you know, but it's hard to know what's the wisest thing to do. But I think we need to be braver. I mentioned that yesterday. I was like, we need to be braver about setting limits. We need to be braver about just having the hard conversations with people. You know, I mean, we have this thing, especially Americans are the worst, like, God forbid somebody doesn't like you. Oh, the world will come to an end. And we're just constantly like compromising and, you know, being conciliatory because like the world will come to an end if somebody doesn't like you. So you don't even want to set a realistic boundary with somebody's behavior. Just do it. You know, forget it. It's not going to work that everybody likes you anyway. Has that ever worked out for you, that everybody in your life, no matter how much you try and do that song and dance? So it's better to just be clear, you know, and we can be clear without being aggressive. And I think that's our fear of thinking if we communicate our needs. There's a system that I really, really love that some of you may be familiar with called nonviolent communication. And it was designed by this man called Marshall Rosenberg, who passed away just recently, I think like 2 years ago. And it's all about training you how to have those challenging conversations to express your needs in a situation in a way that won't provoke as much defensiveness from the other person. And I think it's really good for us to learn some of these techniques and modalities to be able to do just what you're suggesting. Yeah. Yeah, but it takes wisdom and practice. Yeah, yeah. Whew. So isn't that cool? Can you remember that? Can you put this diagram on your fridge? Can you think about it? Okay, so we've just looked at how we can use our understanding of karma, right, to cut through the 12 links. After lunch, We're going to zip through an explanation of emptiness. And then we're going to look at how we can use our understanding of emptiness to also cut through. So we're going to talk about what emptiness is, what emptiness isn't, and then we're going to come back and use that understanding to cut through the 12 links. We can do it. I know we've only got 2 hours left after lunch, but we can do it. We can do this, and we will. So enjoy your lunch. Let's come back at 1, and then we'll have 1 to 3 to look at emptiness. We'll probably have a quick little break in there, and then we'll apply emptiness to this understanding too. Oh, let's do our food offering prayer. What page of 54 is it? For those of you that have this white book.
7 or 95.
95? All right, let's offer our delicious banquet. So 95. So imagining all of the beautiful food transformed into blissful nectar, and then as we eat and drink, we imagine offering that blissful nectar to the Buddha at our heart. So we have to eat and drink to survive, but we can also create virtue through imagining it as an offering. So we'll chant the first verse in Tibetan, and then we'll read the second 2 verses in English. Oma ahum, Oma ahum, Oma ahum. Lama Sangye Lama Choden Lama Gedunte Kungi Jepo Lama Dan Lama Namla Chopabo. To the Supreme Teacher, the precious Buddha, to the Supreme Refuge, the precious Dharma, to the Supreme Guides, the precious Sangha, to the Triple Gem, the objects of refuge, I make offering. May we and those around us in all future lives never be separated from the 3 jewels, continuously make offerings to the 3 jewels, and receive the inspiration of the 3 jewels. Great. Bon appetit. See you at 1 for emptiness. So don't eat too much. I don't want you falling asleep during, like, the essence of, the ultimate nature of reality. That would not be